My name is Ariana. I'm 28 and I just landed my dream job as a software engineer with a salary of $196,000. After struggling through college while supporting myself, I thought my family would be proud of me. Instead, my mum immediately demanded I turn it down because my sister Jamie's anxiety couldn't handle my success. I've spent my whole life dimming my light for my family, but this time was different. Before I tell you how I stood up to my family for the first time in my life, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding your worth. I grew up in a middle-class suburb outside of Boston in a house that looked perfectly normal from the outside. My parents both worked steady jobs. Dad is an accountant and Mum is an elementary school teacher. We weren't rich, but we had enough. At least that's what everyone else saw. What they didn't see was how different life was for me compared to my younger sister Jamie. From the moment Jamie was born when I was 3, it became clear that she was the fragile one, the special one who needed extra attention. My parents especially, my mother treated her like she was made of glass. Jamie is more sensitive than you, my mother would say whenever I questioned why the rules were different for us. You're the strong one, Ariana. You can handle it. And handle it I did because I had no choice. When I was 9, I had to give up my dance lessons because Jamie needed specialized art therapy for her emotional regulation. I'd been dancing since I was 4 and was actually getting pretty good, but my disappointment didn't matter. Your sister needs this therapy, Ariana, Mum said while driving me home from what would be my last dance class. We can't afford both, and you know Jamie struggles more than you do. By the time I was 12, I was forced to switch to the smaller bedroom because Jamie suddenly couldn't sleep in her room anymore. She claimed it had bad energy that triggered her anxiety. You don't want your sister to have panic attacks, do you? Mum asked when I protested, making me feel selfish for even questioning the decision. At 16, I started working at a local grocery store after school and on weekends. Not because I wanted to, but because my parents said we needed the extra money for the family. Meanwhile, Jamie didn't have to work because jobs were too stressful for her. The money I earned rarely went toward things I wanted. Instead, it helped pay for Jamie's special diet, Jamie's art supplies, Jamie's new clothes. My father was physically present but emotionally absent in these family dynamics. He never contradicted my mother, never stood up for me, never questioned the blatant favoritism. When I would go to him privately hoping for some support, he would just sigh and say, "You know how your mother gets. It's easier if we just keep the peace." My mother had a full arsenal of manipulation tactics that she deployed whenever I showed any resistance. The guilt trips were her specialty. "After everything we've done for you," she would say, as if providing basic necessities to your child was some extraordinary act of generosity. When guilt didn't work, she moved on to emotional blackmail. This family functions as a unit, Ariana. If you don't do your part, everyone suffers. And when all else failed, there was always gaslighting. You're imagining things. We treat you and Jamie exactly the same. You're just looking for problems because you're jealous of your sister. Years of this treatment shaped me into the ultimate people pleaser. I learned to anticipate everyone else's needs before my own. I became hyper-vigilant, always looking for ways to avoid conflict. My self-esteem was practically non-existent because I'd been taught that my feelings and desires were secondary if they mattered at all. The one bright spot came in my junior year of high school when I discovered computer science. Our school had just started offering a programming class, and from the first day, I was hooked. Here was something I was naturally good at, something that made logical sense when the rest of my life felt so irrational. When I was coding, I felt in control. The computer didn't play favorites or change the rules. If you wrote the code correctly, it worked. If there was a problem, you could debug it methodically. It was everything my family life wasn't. I threw myself into learning everything I could about programming. I stayed after school to use the computers since we couldn't afford one at home. I borrowed books from the library and taught myself additional languages beyond what we were learning in class. By senior year, I had set my sights on getting a computer science scholarship to get me out of that house. I studied relentlessly for my SATs, maintained a perfect GPA, and applied to every scholarship I could find. When the acceptance letter came from State University with a partial scholarship, I felt like I could finally breathe. It wasn't a full ride, which meant I'd still need to work throughout college, but it was my ticket to freedom. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that my life could be different. College was the first time I could remember feeling like I could just be me. Living in the dorms 3 hours from home, I started to understand what normal life could feel like. No one was comparing me to a sibling. No one was making me feel guilty for existing, and no one was demanding I shrink myself to make others comfortable. My roommate Tara was the first person who really helped me see just how dysfunctional my family actually was. She came from a supportive, loving family where everyone was encouraged to pursue their own interests and accomplishments were celebrated, not resented. "Wait, your mum made you give up dance because your sister needed therapy?" Tara asked one night during our first semester. "Why couldn't your parents figure out a way for you both to do activities?" I didn't have an answer. It had never occurred to me to question that decision. That conversation was the first of many that would help me recognize the patterns of favoritism and manipulation that defined my childhood. But freedom came with its own challenges. Even with my scholarship, I still needed to cover living expenses and the remainder of my tuition. I juggled 3 part-time jobs throughout college, morning shifts at the campus coffee shop, weekend receptionist at a local salon, and online tutoring at night, all while maintaining the high GPA needed to keep my scholarship. Meanwhile, I was trying to establish some healthy boundaries with my family. I limited calls home to once a week instead of the daily check-ins my mother demanded. I didn't come home for every weekend visit that was expected of me. Small acts of independence that felt revolutionary at the time. Those boundaries were constantly tested. During my sophomore year, Jamie dropped out of the community college she'd been attending, claiming her anxiety was too severe to continue. She moved back home with my parents, and suddenly the pressure on me intensified. "Jamie's having such a hard time," my mother would say during our weekly calls. "We're spending so much on her therapy. Could you send a little more money home this month to help out?" It didn't matter that I was barely making ends meet myself. It didn't matter that Jamie was physically capable of working, but chose not to. The family pattern remained: Ariana provides, Jamie receives. A turning point came when I met Professor Lynn in my junior year advanced algorithms class. She noticed my aptitude for problem solving and took me under her wing. More importantly, she saw my potential in a way my family never had. "You should apply for the summer internship program at TechStart," she told me after class one day. "It's competitive, but with your skills and work ethic, you have a real shot. And it pays well." The idea terrified and excited me. The internship was with a rising tech startup in Chicago, and it would mean spending the summer away from my jobs. But Professor Lynn helped me see that this short-term sacrifice could lead to much bigger opportunities down the road. I applied, not telling my family until I'd been selected. When I finally shared the news during a Sunday call home, my mother's response was predictable. "Chicago? That's so far away. How will you send money home if you're not working your regular jobs? Jamie's therapist just recommended an intensive outpatient program that insurance won't fully cover." When I explained that the internship paid more than all my current jobs combined, her tone shifted slightly. There was calculation in her voice when she asked, "So you'll actually be able to send more money home then?" I gripped my phone tightly, and for the first time, I lied to my mother. "The cost of living in Chicago is much higher. I'll barely be breaking even." That summer internship changed everything for me professionally. I learned more in those 3 months than in 2 years of classes. I made connections with industry professionals who saw my potential. I got a taste of what my career could become if I continued on this path. When I returned to campus for senior year, I had a new level of confidence. I applied for another competitive internship for winter break, and again, I got it. My resume was starting to look impressive. At my graduation ceremony, I looked out into the audience and saw my parents and Jamie sitting there. They hadn't wanted to come. Jamie had complained about the anxiety of traveling and being in crowds, but I had insisted. This was my moment, and for once I wanted them to witness my achievement. As I crossed the stage to receive my diploma with honors in computer science, I heard Tara and my other friends cheering loudly. My family offered polite applause. Later at the small dinner I'd arranged at a restaurant near campus, my mother spent most of the time talking about how difficult the trip had been for Jamie. "The hotel room had a funny smell that almost triggered one of her episodes," she explained to the table. "And all these crowds today were really overwhelming for her." I caught Tara's eye across the table and saw the mix of outrage and sympathy there, but I just nodded and changed the subject. I had a job lined up at a small tech company in Boston, and I was ready to start the next chapter of my life. The next 3 years at SmartSys Technologies taught me everything about being a professional in the tech industry. It wasn't a prestigious company, but it was a solid first job where I could build my skills and my confidence. I worked on increasingly complex projects and earned a reputation as someone who could solve difficult problems efficiently. Being a woman in tech came with its own set of challenges. There were the meetings where my ideas were ignored until a male colleague repeated them. There was the time I was asked to order lunch for a client meeting, despite being the lead developer on the project. There was the constant need to prove myself over and over again. You need to document everything, advised Denise, one of the few other female engineers at the company who quickly became my closest friend at work. Every win, every successful project, every positive client interaction. Men in this industry are presumed competent until proven otherwise. We're presumed incompetent until we prove otherwise. Denise had 10 years of experience on me and had worked at several major tech companies before landing at SmartSys. She became my unofficial mentor, helping me navigate office politics and encouraging me to advocate for myself. After my second year, when I led a project that brought in a major new client, I approached my manager about a raise. Despite the project's success, I was offered just a 3% increase. That's standard for your level, my manager explained, not meeting my eyes. I later learned through Denise that a male colleague with less experience had received a 12% raise after a much smaller win. It was frustrating, but I used it as motivation to work even harder. By my third year at SmartSys, I was getting restless. The projects were becoming repetitive, and I knew I was capable of more challenging work. That's when Denise dropped a bombshell over our Friday lunch. "I'm applying to Novatech in San Francisco," she said, naming one of the most prestigious tech companies in the country. "And you should too." I nearly choked on my sandwich. "Novatech, Denise, they hire from MIT and Stanford, not state university grads like me." She shook her head firmly. "They hire talent, Ariana, and you've got it in spades. Your work here speaks for itself. Just look at what you've accomplished with limited resources. Imagine what you could do at a company that actually invests in innovation." The idea seemed absurd at first, but Denise was persistent. She sent me job postings, connected me with a friend who worked there, and basically refused to let me talk myself out of applying. "The worst they can say is no," she reasoned. "But I don't think they will." The application process was grueling. There were 5 rounds of increasingly difficult technical interviews, coding challenges that stretched my abilities, and behavioral interviews designed to assess whether I'd be a cultural fit. I spent weeks preparing, working late into the night after my regular job. When the call came from Novatech's HR department, I was almost too nervous to answer. But I did, and the words I heard changed everything. "We'd like to offer you the position of Senior Software Engineer at Novatech, with a starting salary of $196,000 annually, plus benefits and relocation assistance to San Francisco." I had to ask the recruiter to repeat the number because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My current salary was $68,000. This was nearly triple what I was making, plus benefits that included stock options, health insurance with complete coverage, a retirement plan with matching, and even a wellness stipend. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence for several minutes before calling Denise, who screamed with excitement when I told her. We went out that night to celebrate, joined by a few other friends who'd supported me through the interview process. "To Ariana," Denise toasted, raising her glass. "Novatech doesn't know how lucky they are to get you." For once, I allowed myself to feel genuinely proud of my accomplishment. I had done this on my own through hard work and perseverance. No one had handed me anything. The next day, still riding high on excitement, I called my parents to share the news. I knew better than to expect enthusiasm, but I thought they might at least acknowledge that this was a significant achievement. "Novatech in San Francisco has offered me a job," I said when my mother answered. "It's an amazing opportunity with a salary that's almost $200,000. There was a pause before my mother responded, her voice immediately tense. "San Francisco, that's all the way across the country. Why would you even consider that?" "Because it's one of the top tech companies in the world, Mum. This is a huge opportunity for my career." "You have a perfectly good job in Boston," she replied. "You're just being selfish now, thinking only about yourself. What about your family? What about Jamie?" Speaking of Jamie, I could hear her in the background asking questions. My mother must have explained because suddenly Jamie was on the phone. "You can't move to San Francisco, Ari," she said, her voice already quivering with the threat of tears. "You know I can't handle change. Just the thought of you moving so far away is making my chest tight." "Jamie, this is a really important opportunity for me," I tried to explain. "So your job is more important than my mental health?" she demanded. "You know my anxiety gets worse when I'm stressed. If you take this job and start showing off with all that money, I'll probably end up back in therapy. Is that what you want? I could hear my mother in the background encouraging Jamie's reaction. Tell her how you feel, sweetheart. She needs to understand the impact her selfishness has on you. I asked to speak to my father, hoping for at least a modicum of support. When he got on the phone, all he said was, "You know how things are, Ariana. Your mother and sister are very upset about this. Maybe look for a better opportunity closer to home." Then came the ultimatum from my mother, who had taken the phone back. If you take this job, you're choosing your own selfish desires over your family's well-being. If that's your choice, don't expect to remain part of this family. After hanging up, I broke down completely. Alone in my apartment, I sobbed until I had no tears left. This should have been one of the happiest moments of my life. Instead, it had been twisted into another example of how my achievements were seen as threats to the family system. The manipulation didn't stop with that phone call. Over the next week, my mother launched what felt like a full-scale attack designed to break my resolve. She called multiple times daily, each conversation more emotionally charged than the last. "Jamie barely slept last night because she was so anxious about your news," she reported the morning after our initial conversation. "She's in no condition to go to her part-time job today. Is that what you wanted to happen?" When I didn't immediately cave, she escalated by showing up at my apartment in Boston unannounced the following weekend. I opened my door to find her standing there looking grim and determined. "We need to talk about this in person," she said, pushing past me into my small living space. "This isn't something to decide over the phone." For the next 3 hours, she cycled through every manipulation tactic in her arsenal. She cried about how I was abandoning the family. She reminded me of all the sacrifices they'd made for me growing up. She questioned whether I was mentally stable enough to make such a big decision. "You've always been impulsive, Ariana," she said conveniently, forgetting that I'd been the responsible one my entire life. "I'm concerned that you haven't thought this through." Jamie's anxiety attacks seemed to occur with suspicious timing throughout this period. Whenever I stood firm in a conversation with my mother, like clockwork, Jamie would have a crisis that required immediate attention. "I have to go," my mother would say abruptly. "Jamie just texted that she can't breathe. We'll finish this conversation later." These conversations never actually finished. They just reset to begin again with fresh ammunition. The next phase involved recruiting extended family members to join the pressure campaign. My Aunt Susan called on Tuesday evening. "Family comes first, Ariana," she lectured. "Your mother has always been there for you. The least you could do is consider her feelings in this." I wanted to ask when exactly my mother had been there for me, but held my tongue. Uncle Paul called the next day. "There must be more suitable jobs closer to home," he suggested. "Something that doesn't upset your sister so much. Have you really looked?" Even my grandmother, who I'd always been close to, joined in. "You're being selfish, dear," she said during our usually pleasant weekly call. "No one likes a show-off. All that money and prestige, it's not what makes a good life." What made this pressure campaign particularly infuriating was that I knew Jamie wasn't nearly as fragile as everyone pretended. While my mother was telling me that Jamie was too anxious to function because of my job offer, Jamie's social media told a different story. There she was at a concert with friends, smiling broadly for the camera. There she was at a rooftop bar, cocktail in hand. There she was with a new boyfriend looking completely anxiety-free as they posed on a weekend hiking trip. When I tentatively brought this up to my mother, suggesting that perhaps Jamie was more resilient than they were giving her credit for, the gaslighting began immediately. "Those are old photos," she insisted, or days when she was pushing herself too hard. "You don't see her afterward when she crashes. You don't hear her crying at night. You always want to believe the worst about your sister." Meanwhile, the clock was ticking. Novatech's HR department had given me 2 weeks to make my decision, and 10 days had already passed. The relocation coordinator had emailed twice asking about my preferences for moving services. The team I would be joining had sent a welcome email saying how excited they were to have me on board. I felt physically ill from the stress. I wasn't sleeping. I could barely eat. I'd start crying randomly during the day. One moment I was determined to take the job, the next I was composing an email declining the offer just to make the pressure stop. In desperation, I called a therapist whose name I'd gotten from Denise months earlier, but had never contacted. Dr. Morgan managed to fit me in for an emergency session the next day. "Tell me what's happening," Dr. Morgan said once I was seated in her office. The whole story came pouring out of me. Not just the current situation with the job offer, but the years of family dynamics that had led to this point. Dr. Morgan listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just letting me talk. When I finally ran out of words, she leaned forward slightly. Ariana, based on what you've shared, it sounds like you've been trained since childhood to put everyone else's needs before your own. Your mother and sister have created a dynamic where your success and happiness are perceived as threats. That's not healthy or normal. Hearing someone validate what I'd begun to suspect was both relieving and painful. So what do? I asked. The question you need to ask yourself is, if family pressure wasn't a factor, what would you choose? I'd take the job, I said without hesitation. It's an amazing opportunity. Dr. Morgan nodded. Then that's your answer. The discomfort you're feeling isn't about making the wrong choice. It's about breaking a dysfunctional pattern that's existed your whole life. That's always painful, but it's also necessary for growth. The day after my session with Dr. Morgan, I was looking through an old photo album when something shifted inside me. There was a picture of me at age 7 holding a science fair award, smiling proudly. Standing next to me were my parents, but their attention wasn't on me or my achievement. They were both looking at 4-year-old Jamie, who was having a tantrum in the corner of the frame. It was such a perfect metaphor for my childhood that I actually laughed out loud. In that moment, I had complete clarity. I'd been conditioned my entire life to believe that putting myself first was selfish, that my achievements were only valid if they didn't outshine others, that my worth was measured by my usefulness to my family. I picked up my phone and called Professor Lynn, who had remained a mentor even after graduation. I explained the situation and asked for her perspective. Ariana, listen to me, she said firmly. This offer from Novatech isn't just about a salary. It's about recognizing your talent and potential. Taking this job isn't selfish. It's honoring the gifts you've been given and the hard work you've put in. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is to live your own life even when others try to hold you back. Her words resonated deeply. I thanked her and then sat down to craft a plan. I would accept the job, but I needed to protect my mental health through the transition. First, I called Denise, who had already accepted her position at Novatech and would be moving to San Francisco a month before me. I need help setting up a support system, I told her. I can't go through this move with only my family's voices in my head. Denise was immediately on board. I'll start apartment hunting for both of us right away, and I'll introduce you to my friend group out there as soon as you arrive. You won't be alone, I promise. Next, I reached out to Tara, who now lived in Los Angeles. Would you be willing to come up to San Francisco for my first weekend there? I could really use a friendly face. Already checking flights? She replied instantly. With my support system in place, I emailed Novatech, accepting the position and thanking them for the opportunity. The wave of relief I felt after hitting send confirmed I was making the right decision. I didn't tell my family immediately. Instead, I made arrangements for the move, securing an apartment in the same building as Denise and scheduling the moving company. I requested that my start date be 3 weeks after accepting the offer, giving me time to wrap up my current job and relocate. 2 days before I planned to give notice at SmartSys, my mother called with her most dramatic manipulation attempt yet. Jamie's in the hospital, she said, her voice grave. Her anxiety spiraled out of control thinking about you moving away. The doctors are monitoring her heart rate. You need to come home right away. My old self would have dropped everything and rushed to the hospital, consumed with guilt. The new me, bolstered by therapy and clarity, was more cautious. Which hospital? I asked. I'll call and see when visiting hours are. There was a pause. Well, they might be transferring her, my mother said vaguely. Better to just come to the house first. My suspicions grew. After we hung up, I called my father's cell phone directly, something I rarely did. Dad, which hospital is Jamie in? I want to send flowers. Another telling pause. I'm not at the hospital right now, he said carefully. But you know which one she's in, right? Since Mum said she was admitted for anxiety issues. My father sighed heavily. Ariana, you know how your mother gets. Jamie had a panic attack, but she's at home resting. Your mother thought you'd be more likely to come if... Look, just come for dinner tomorrow and we can talk about everything. So there it was. There was no hospitalization, just another attempt to manipulate me. I agreed to the dinner, deciding it was time for the direct approach. The next evening, I arrived at my parents' house with a clear goal. I would announce my decision calmly and set boundaries around how I expected to be treated. I would not justify, argue, defend, or explain beyond stating the basic facts. Dinner was tense from the start. My mother had prepared all my favorite foods, an obvious attempt to remind me of what I'd be giving up by moving away. Jamie sat sullenly at the table, occasionally shooting me wounded looks. When we were midway through the meal, I took a deep breath and spoke. I've accepted the position at Novatech. I'm moving to San Francisco in 2 weeks. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my mother's fork clattered against her plate. After everything we talked about, she said, her voice rising. After what it did to your sister, how could you be so selfish? This isn't about being selfish, I replied evenly. It's about making the right career move for me. What about family? She demanded. Doesn't that matter to you at all? Of course it does, but family should support each other's growth and success, not hold each other back. Jamie started crying on cue. You're doing this to hurt me, she sobbed. You know I can't handle you moving so far away. I turned to her, keeping my voice gentle but firm. Jamie, I love you, but my career decisions aren't about you. You're an adult now too. It's time we both lived our own lives. My mother's face flushed with anger when her usual tactics weren't working. If you leave, don't expect us to be here when you come crawling back after failing. Because you will fail, Ariana. You've never been as special as you think you are. Those words would have devastated me in the past. Now they just confirmed I was making the right choice. My father, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. Ariana, please just think about this more. Your mother is upset. Jamie is upset. Can't you find a way to keep the peace? I looked at him sadly. Keeping the peace has always meant sacrificing what I want and need. I'm not doing that anymore. I stood up from the table, my dinner barely touched. I love you all, but I'm taking this job. I hope eventually you can be happy for me, but even if you can't, my decision is made. As I walked out of that house, I felt a strange mix of sadness and liberation. The family patterns were so ingrained that I had no illusion they would change overnight. But for the first time, I had chosen myself, and no amount of guilt or manipulation could take away the power of that choice. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I gave notice at SmartSys, packed up my apartment, and prepared for the cross-country move. With Denise's help, I found a furnished apartment in San Francisco that I could move into immediately upon arrival. True to their word, my family didn't contact me during this time. I sent a group text with my new address and phone number the day before I left, receiving no response. As painful as the silence was, it also allowed me to focus on the exciting changes ahead without constant emotional drainage. My friends threw me a going-away party the night before my flight. As I looked around at the people who had supported me through this difficult decision, I felt a surge of gratitude. These people celebrated my success instead of resenting it. They encouraged my growth instead of stifling it. They showed me what healthy relationships could look like. The morning of my flight, I blocked my family's numbers. Not permanently, but just to give myself space to settle into my new life without their negativity. Tara and Denise both texted to wish me a safe flight, and as the plane took off from Boston, I felt like I was finally flying toward the future I deserved. My first month at Novatech was both challenging and exhilarating. The work was cutting edge and pushed me to expand my skills daily. My teammates were brilliant, collaborative, and welcoming. For the first time in my professional life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The San Francisco apartment, though small, quickly became my sanctuary. I decorated it with bright colors and plants, things that made me happy without having to justify my choices to anyone. Denise lived just 2 floors above me, and her friendship helped ease the transition to a new city. We're going out tonight, she announced on my first Friday in town. Time to meet some new people. She introduced me to her friend group, an eclectic mix of tech professionals, artists, and educators. They welcomed me warmly, and I soon found myself with invitations to hiking trips, book clubs, and dinner parties. One particularly meaningful connection came through a support group Denise recommended called Breaking Family Patterns. It was for people who, like me, were establishing healthier boundaries with dysfunctional families. Hearing others' stories made me feel less alone and gave me practical strategies for managing the ongoing fallout with my family. Because there was definitely fallout. About 3 weeks after my move, I started noticing posts from extended family members on social media. My Aunt Susan posted a vague but pointed message. So sad when young people abandon their families for money and status. Family should always come first. An uncle shared a meme about ungrateful children that was clearly directed at me. Cousins I'd been close to growing up suddenly went quiet or unfriended me altogether. Then Jamie launched her campaign. She posted a tearful selfie with the caption, "When the person who's supposed to have your back betrays you for a paycheck. Still trying to cope with the abandonment. #anxiety, #betrayed, #family issues." The comments were filled with sympathy for her and condemnation for me, though no one mentioned me by name. My mother, who rarely posted on social media, began sharing articles about family loyalty and the emptiness of material success. It hurt, I won't deny that, but the distance gave me perspective I'd never had before. I could see the manipulation for what it was, an attempt to regain control over me through public shame and guilt. In the past, it would have worked. Now I simply muted their accounts and focused on building my new life. 2 months into my time in San Francisco, I received an email that complicated things. My grandmother's 80th birthday was approaching and there would be a family celebration. Despite everything, I loved my grandmother and wanted to be there for her milestone birthday. After discussing it with Dr. Morgan, whom I was still seeing through virtual sessions, I decided to attend. It would be my first time seeing my family since moving, and I prepared myself mentally for the encounter. When I arrived at the party venue, a rented room at my grandmother's favorite restaurant back in Massachusetts, I could feel eyes on me immediately. Some relatives approached with cautious warmth, while others deliberately avoided me. My mother and Jamie were holding court near my grandmother, obviously having positioned themselves as the devoted family members, in contrast to my perceived abandonment. I greeted my grandmother first, giving her the delicate silver bracelet I'd bought as a gift. "Happy birthday, Grandma. I've missed you." Her eyes lit up. "Ariana, you look wonderful. California must agree with you." Before we could talk further, my mother appeared at her side. "Mother, you should greet the Hendersons. They just arrived." She barely acknowledged my presence with a cold nod. I circulated through the party, trying to reconnect with relatives who seemed receptive. Some were genuinely interested in hearing about my new job and life in San Francisco. Others were clearly uncomfortable, caught between curiosity about my experiences and loyalty to my mother and Jamie. The confrontation I'd been dreading came during the cake cutting, as everyone gathered around. My mother took the microphone to make a toast to my grandmother. Somehow she managed to work in a pointed comment about how some family members make the effort to be present in our daily lives, not just for special occasions. Several relatives looked uncomfortably in my direction. Jamie stood beside my mother, nodding dramatically with tears in her eyes. When the microphone was offered to other family members to share memories or wishes, I decided to take it. I wouldn't stoop to their level, but I wouldn't remain silent either. "Grandma," I said, looking directly at my grandmother and ignoring the tense faces around her. "You taught me that true strength comes from being authentic to yourself while still caring for others. You showed me that it's possible to be both kind and firm in your boundaries. Those lessons have shaped who I am today, and I'm grateful for your wisdom and love." My grandmother smiled broadly, clearly touched by my words. But as I handed the microphone to the next person, my mother grabbed Jamie's arm and made a show of comforting her, as she appeared to be on the verge of a meltdown. "We need some air," my mother announced loudly, steering Jamie toward the exit. "This is all too much for her." The room fell awkwardly silent as they left. My father looked torn as usual before following them out. I stood my ground, refusing to chase after them or apologize for simply existing in the same space. To my surprise, my cousin Melissa approached me after this scene. "That was ridiculous," she said quietly. "We all saw what just happened. Jamie was fine until Aunt Carol decided she shouldn't be." I was shocked by her candor. "You noticed that too?" Melissa nodded. "A lot of us have noticed the dynamic for years, but no one wanted to say anything. Seeing how they're treating you now, though, it's not right, Ariana." As the party continued, several other relatives approached with similar sentiments. Not everyone certainly, but enough to make me realize that the family narrative my mother had constructed wasn't as universally accepted as she believed. My grandmother sought me out before I left. "They'll come around eventually," she said, patting my hand. Success is hard for some people to accept in others, especially when they haven't found it themselves. Don't let it dim your light, sweetheart. After most guests had departed, I found myself alone with my father in the parking lot. He looked tired and much older than his 58 years. "Your mother means well," he began his standard opening for any discussion about family dysfunction. "Does she, Dad? Or is she just afraid of losing control?" He didn't answer directly, which was telling in itself. "Things have been difficult since you left. Jamie has good days and bad days. And on her good days, does Mum remind her how devastated she's supposed to be about my move? Does she encourage Jamie to post about her suffering on social media?" My father looked away. "It's complicated." "No, Dad, it's actually very simple. Jamie is capable of far more independence than anyone encourages her to develop. And Mum needs the family to revolve around Jamie's needs because it gives her purpose and control. He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know how to fix any of this. It's not yours alone to fix, I said gently, but acknowledging the truth would be a start. As I drove back to the airport that night, I felt a mix of emotions. The confrontation had been difficult, but also clarifying. Some family members had seen through the manipulation. Others never would. I couldn't control their perceptions, but I could control how I responded to them. Back in San Francisco, I resumed my new life with even greater appreciation for the freedom I'd claimed. Work continued to be challenging and rewarding. I expanded my social circle and started exploring the beautiful California coast on weekends. I even began dating again, meeting interesting people who knew nothing of my family drama and saw me simply for who I was. I maintained limited contact with my family, responding to texts occasionally, but setting firm boundaries around what I would and wouldn't discuss. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. 6 months after moving to San Francisco, I received news that validated my difficult decision. I was being promoted to team lead on one of Novatech's most innovative projects. The promotion came with another salary increase and additional stock options. More importantly, it was recognition of my skills and dedication. My life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined when I was still trapped in the family dynamic back in Boston. I had a beautiful apartment with a view of the bay. I had made genuine friendships with people who celebrated my successes. I was thriving professionally in a role that challenged and excited me. Most significantly, I had found a sense of peace with myself through ongoing therapy with Dr. Morgan. I was working through the layers of guilt and people-pleasing tendencies that had been instilled in me since childhood. I was learning that setting boundaries wasn't selfish. It was necessary for healthy relationships. I had maintained limited structured contact with my family on my terms. I called once a month, kept conversations brief and positive, and disengaged when manipulation tactics began. Sometimes this meant ending calls abruptly, but I remained consistent in my boundaries. 4 months after my grandmother's birthday party, I received a surprising text from my father. "We'll be in SF for a conference next week. Would like to see you if possible." We arranged to meet for dinner at a restaurant near my apartment. When he arrived, I was struck again by how tired he looked, but there was something else too. A nervousness I wasn't used to seeing in him. After ordering, he got straight to the point. "Your mother doesn't know I'm here." I told her the conference was in Seattle. I raised my eyebrows, but said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "I wanted to see how you were doing, and I wanted to see it for myself, not through your mother's interpretation." "I'm doing really well, Dad," I said honestly. "Better than I've ever been." He nodded slowly. "I can see that. You look lighter somehow, happier." We talked about my job, my apartment, my new friends. For once, he seemed genuinely interested, asking questions, and actually listening to my answers. Then as our entrees arrived, his expression grew more serious. "Things at home have been changing," he said carefully. "Not all at once, but gradually. Jamie got a full-time job last month." This was genuinely surprising news. "Really doing what?" "Administrative work at a dental office. It's nothing fancy, but she goes every day and seems to like the structure." "That's great," I said, meaning it. "I'm happy for her." "There's more," he continued. "About 2 months ago, she admitted something to me. She said that a lot of her anxiety over the years was, well, partly performance. She said she learned early on that being the fragile one got her attention and special treatment." I put down my fork, stunned by this admission. "She actually said that—" My father nodded, looking both sad and relieved. "She said watching you build your own life made her realize she was capable of more than she'd been pretending to be. She's even started seeing a therapist, a real one this time, not just the ones your mother found who reinforced the dependency." "Does Mom know about this conversation?" "No," he admitted. "Your mother is still resistant to change. She still talks about your abandonment and how selfish you've been. But with Jamie becoming more independent, your mother has less to focus her energy on. I think eventually she'll have to face some hard truths." I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me was angry that it had taken my complete removal from the family system for these changes to begin. Part of me was cautiously hopeful that healing might be possible, even if it took years. "I owe you an apology, Ariana," my father said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have protected you more. I should have stood up to your mother when the favoritism was happening. I was weak, and you paid the price for that weakness." Tears pricked at my eyes. "Thank you for saying that, Dad. It means a lot to hear you acknowledge what happened." "I'm trying to do better now," he said. "Not just with you, but with Jamie too. Real support isn't enabling dependency. I see that now. Before leaving San Francisco, my father visited my apartment and met a few of my friends at a casual dinner I arranged. He seemed genuinely happy to see the life I'd built, and for the first time I felt like he was seeing me as an individual, not just as a component of the family system. In the months that followed, other small changes occurred. My relationship with extended family members began to repair as they saw through social media and occasional visits that I was thriving, not suffering in my new life. A few even privately reached out to ask about how I'd found the courage to break free, suggesting they too recognized the dysfunction. Jamie and I began texting occasionally, casual sisterly exchanges without the drama that had characterized our relationship for so long. She never directly acknowledged her role in the family dynamics, but the absence of manipulation in our communications was acknowledgement enough for now. My mother remained the most resistant to change, but even she began making small efforts after what my father later told me was an extended family intervention of sorts. Several relatives, including my grandmother, had finally voiced their concerns about her controlling behavior and the way she had pitted Jamie and me against each other over the years. A year after taking the job at Novatech, I used part of my substantial salary to establish a mentorship program for young women in tech from disadvantaged backgrounds. The program provided not just technical guidance, but also coaching on workplace dynamics and setting healthy professional boundaries. "You've turned your pain into purpose," Dr. Morgan observed during one of our now monthly check-in sessions. "That's the hallmark of true healing." The journey of self-forgiveness was perhaps the most challenging aspect of my growth. For years, I had internalized the belief that putting myself first was selfish, that my worth was measured by my usefulness to others. Unlearning those patterns took conscious effort every day. I had to forgive myself for the years I spent shrinking to make others comfortable. I had to forgive myself for believing I didn't deserve success and happiness. I had to forgive myself for the anger I still sometimes felt toward my family, even as we were taking small steps toward a healthier relationship. The most profound lesson I learned through this experience was about the true nature of family. Blood relation doesn't automatically entitle people to unrestricted access to your life, your energy, or your dreams. Real family, whether biological or chosen, supports your growth, celebrates your successes, and respects your boundaries. Breaking generational patterns requires tremendous courage. It means being willing to endure disapproval, guilt, and even temporary estrangement. But on the other side of that difficult journey is the freedom to become who you were always meant to be. As I look back on the frightened, people-pleasing woman who almost turned down an amazing opportunity to keep the peace with her family, I feel both compassion and pride. That woman did the bravest thing possible. She chose herself even when it was painful, and in doing so, she not only changed her own life, but began a ripple effect that offered others the possibility of change as well. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't staying. It's walking away until they learn to respect the person you've become. And sometimes, just sometimes, they actually do. Have you ever had to choose between your own growth and someone else's comfort? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about finding your worth, and share this with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to choose themselves. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, your dreams deserve to be pursued even when others don't understand them.